coming back to the emotional intelligence and, to be able to really regulate your emotions and understand your feelings, that is even more important. And the other point which you made is to be able to introspect.
Yes.
So we try teaching this to kids, of course, at home all the time, try having this conversation, how they can recognize their feelings and express them better.
Yeah.
And I know at school, we have a counselor who's constantly in touch with the kids.
Yes.
And helping them even further to understand this at a deeper level.
Yeah.
But not all schools have counselors.
Yes.
And I think some do not even recognize the importance of it. How important do you think it is to have counselors on the campus, be in touch regularly with the students?
I think it's critical.
Yeah.
Like anything, you have to have the right counselors, right? You have to have the right people.
Yeah.
But, I used to, especially in my background in physics, my view of teaching and learning was very focused on thinking, right? On cognition.
Yeah.
And what I've learned, how I've changed my mind over the years, is recognizing we're not so much thinking creatures that have emotions. We're actually emotional creatures that think every so often, right?
Yes.
And emotions go hand in hand with learning.
Yeah.
And emotions can get in the way of learning.
Yeah.
Right. And they can also open up learning new paths if you have the right excitement and emotion about it. But we find more and more kids are coming to school and getting dysregulated over something, right? A trigger of some kind. Sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes it's insecurity. Sometimes it's ego. They feel like they've been slighted or insulted. And the kids seem to be fragile, right? They lack this sort of resiliency that I was talking about. And so having an opportunity to have someone with the expertise to work with a child who's in a dysregulated state, to have them become regulated again, right, is a much better solution than just sending them home.
Yeah.
And it's a much better solution than just, having the classroom disrupted, right? And so having people that understand the emotional life of a child and how they can learn these skills, because I think there is a time when people just thought that that's just personality, right? That you can't really teach anyone how to do that. And what we know is, no, you can. You can actually give people strategies and skills for how to manage their emotions. And I think teaching kids those skills more explicitly are becoming more and more important, particularly in the kind of world that we're living in. I mean, the world has changed. I think, of course, the traditional approach is that belongs at home.
Yes.
Right? The parents should be in charge of the emotional development of the child, not the school. The school is just cognition, right? It's just teach them math, teach them how to read. We'll do everything else. And I think schools were happy with that too.
True.
We used to tell parents, drop your kids off and don't come into the school. We will see you at night. You have the night shift. We have the day shift, right? We're going to agree to that. But with social media and communication, the boundaries are blurred.
True.
The things that happen at home impact the kid's ability to perform at school, and the things that happen at school impact your ability to parent at home.
True.
So we have to be in this partnership. Right? We have to partner together with this, and I'm finding more and more we're doing parent workshops.
Yes.
Parents are thirsty, right, to have more sort of help in how to parent in this day and age. We've this is also cultural. Certainly in the U.S. we're seeing this, but I think we're seeing this in India too. Yeah. Where, in India, families are much more intact than in the U.S. But if you come from a family that's not intact, you may not be living near your parents or your relatives. You may not be going to church. You may not have that center. You may not have a community group, right? So you're very isolated. When we're working with families at the school that I'm in, international school, we have families from all over the world. They're displaced from their home cultures and maybe from their home support systems. Yeah. And that isolation means that parents don't know where to turn when they have challenges. Yeah. And the school has to be that, right? Yeah. The school has to take on that role now of helping to coach parents and to facilitate this partnership and create for the parent, not just the child, but for the parents and the whole family, a sense of belonging.
Yes.
This is our community. You belong here, right? You're part of us.
Yeah.
We will help you. You will help us, and we're going to work together. And that's such a different model from what I just described when I was growing up. The teachers over here in the school, and then the parents are separate, and they have their own support systems. And once we've lost some of those support systems, schools have had to make up for that. And we see that the best schools have had to do that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a big fan of that. And how much I love this fact that I can just walk in anytime and be on the campus where my children are learning. I don't really go to the classrooms while
that's
they're
good.
learning.
We don't want you in the classroom.
But at the same time, as a parent, I'm speaking from the parent's point of view. It just gives so much comfort to think that there's always some parent on the campus.
Yes.
While the teachers are there giving their best, but there are always some parents on the campus watching the kids, or, like I keep hearing from other moms, oh, I saw Gracia, she was going for her swimming class, and Rio was playing and reading in the library. It gives me so much comfort to hear that.
And it's this parent network too, right?
Yes.
The parent associations have more than just the task of supporting the school. They're supporting each other, right?
Yeah.
And parents have this community now that they can get together and have coffee and talk about their children and talk about things that are happening and how they can provide that support. So finding real support systems in this crazy world that we're living in is becoming more and more critical.
And as you said, it really feels like family. It really feels like a community where we're working together, and having the idea or thought of like, my children are somewhere where I'm not allowed. That's very discomforting. Like, it's scary. I'm like, why there is a space where my kids are spending most of their time during the day, and I am not allowed to be there.
Well, if you don't have a good family school partnership, they don't want parents around. Yeah. And so the fact that the school that I'm at, that we're able to do that, means a lot about, or says a lot about our relationship with parents and the strength of that partnership, which is so important. So
thank you so much for letting us access the campus and letting us be there whenever we want to be. So I really appreciate that effort and this policy. So much needed at every school, I think. How can we teach our children to embrace failures?
There are some ways to do it.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, again, for a child who has this sort of perfectionist disease where everything has to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
And they don't take failure well. I would say the aspect of schools that teach failure the best is the athletic teams, the sports. And I know your husband's involved. This has been a sports person, an athlete his whole life.
Yeah.
But a lot of what's important about kids participating in sports or other extracurriculars, right, is to experience failure, right? There's going to be a time when you're not going to win. You're going to miss that shot. You're going to let your teammates down. You're going to run into somebody who's better than you.
Yes.
Right? And how do you handle that, right? And so I think teaching a child how to experience those things and regulate their emotions around it and be able to say, okay, that happened. I'm going to get better and I'm going to do this is a wonderful thing. There's an interesting story about a family, and their daughter had tried to be the star of the play every year.
Okay.
And she never made it. And finally, the senior year, they went to the school administration and they said, this is entirely unfair. You're biased against my child. I want you to fire the theater teacher, right? And so forth and so on. And this became a case study for parent workshops. And the question is, if you were the parent, what would you do? Here your child is suffering. She's experienced a failure of sorts. Yeah. And now you've gotten so angry, you're intervening. Right. And the point of the story is to ask the parents, well, would you rather have her experience this under the love and protection of you as a family? Yeah. Or do you want her to experience that for the first time when she's in college away from you? Yeah. Right? Because if we don't let our children experience those failures and in the arms and love of support of parents as they're growing up, then the first time they're going to experience failure, you're not going to be there. Yeah. And they won't have the tools and the emotional strength to navigate it. They'll be too fragile. So let's not rob our children of those experiences, right? Yeah. When they come home and they failed the test, or they didn't get the part in the play,
Yeah.
all right, or they lost that game. How do we as parents react to that,
Yeah.
right? Do we sort of say, oh, I'm going to fix that for you. I know the coach. You didn't get enough playing time. I'm going to go yell at the coach, and by gosh, I gave money to that school, so they better, make you a starter on that team.
Yeah.
Because you deserve that, right?
Yeah.
If that's the parent's approach, they're doing real damage to that child.
True.
Because now that child is seeing that they don't have to live with their own consequences, and they don't have to navigate failure because their parents will fix it for them.
True.
They're not learning how to solve those problems
Yeah.
for themselves. So I think there's a lot of things that parents can do.
Yeah.
Just in terms of our attitude, when our child does experience a problem, how do we approach that?
Yeah. Well, I had this conversation with my daughter. She had MAP testing.
Yeah, that happens.
And she was like, I think I failed. And I was like, okay, how do you feel about it?
Yeah.
She's like, well, you should be happy. I at least tried.
And you're like, try harder.
So I'm like, okay, 8-year-old is telling me this,
Yes.
and she thinks she did her bit by just simply being there.
Sure.
So there's a lot I have
There's
to
you see this with boys a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Middle school boys,
Yeah.
where because they can't navigate failure
Yeah.
very well, they will, when they come up against something hard, it's better not to care. Because if you care and you still fail or struggle, then it's like, oh, that's about me. But I have this out. If I say, I didn't care, I didn't try very hard, right?
Yeah.
I'm not really interested.
Yeah.
And it's an emotional sort of safety valve for them,
True.
so that they don't experience failure,
Yeah.
especially when they're under a lot of pressure from parents. So these are all symptoms of avoidance of pain,
Yes.
right? Avoidance of
Yes.
failure. And comes back again to unconditional love, right? They need to know that they can try hard and fail, and I'm still going to love you. I'm going to help you, and we're going to figure it out. But the ability to work hard at something and to care about something goes back to those two things I said: motivation and engagement, which are the key to everything with regards to learning. And if you don't have the motivation, because you're afraid of failure, then you're not going to engage.
True.
That's a problem.
I think every child is also very different.
Yes,
I see that
absolutely.
big difference between my
Yeah.
children.
Yes.
My daughter is now, many times I hear her saying, oh, I don't care. So I know what you mean.
Yeah.
She does care deep down.
Yes.
And she's just not ready to face it.
Yeah.
And my boy, on the other hand, because also it's a trait of the younger ones, the moment he sees that she's avoiding something, he would jump in and is like, Mama, see, I can do this.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, not the right platform and opportunity at this moment, but
It's a really good point to make, though. We've talked a lot about things today, and lots of different pieces of advice and so forth. But your point about every child is different rings so true, right? There's not one piece of advice we can give anyone that's going to work with every child, right?
Yes.
Every child is different,
Yes.
and that's important for us to embrace and understand.
Absolutely. Coming back to the education, there's so many schools still following those traditional practices of how they teach kids. And I think a lot is now moving towards skill-based teaching. So from the traditional books and skill, like the techniques, moving to more skills and doing things, learning by doing things.
Yeah.
Which one do you prefer and why?
Well, I think there's some accountability around skill stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a huge advancement in skill acquisition. I hope so.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the last 100 years of education, we haven't gotten more efficient. We still teach, we may teach different things, but the amount that we teach, if you look at math, for example, we have a math sequence. It's been the same for a very long time.
Yeah.
With the apex being maybe calculus and when you get to be a senior, right? And we don't teach a lot of things that we should be teaching in math, like numerical analysis, right? And there's some other things that we probably should. Statistics, for example, are much more important in day-to-day life than calculus.
True.
And that says as someone who loves calculus, right? But we haven't gotten more efficient in how kids learn skills.
Yeah.
And I think that kids, we have this curriculum that actually moderates the progress of kids in such a way that everyone is on the same timeline. And there's so many kids that could go faster. They could learn at a different rate. They could acquire skills at a faster rate. We could be more efficient in how we teach, sort of the skill based.
Yeah.
And so you need both. You need the socialization and sort of general problem solving and working with each other, and you need skills. You need both.
Yeah.
And so there's a wonderful vision. This actually comes from a guy, George Linder, back in the 60s, right? He had this vision of the perfect school, which is not unlike some new schools that are becoming built in this day and age, where the morning was skill-based and it was all what they call adaptive testing, right?
Yeah.
So that's AI adaptive. So it moves at the pace the child moves. And so they would do their hour or two of skills moderated by a computer and adaptive, and they could make progress and learn these things that they needed to learn.
Yeah.
And then the afternoon was project-based learning.
Wow.
With other kids.
Where they could actually test it and implement it.
Yeah. And so, if we're doing skills in an inefficient way, then they're doing skills all day long.
Yeah.
And they never get to the application or the problem base or the socialization that we know is so important.
Yeah.
And so I think the efficiency of what they call an intelligent tutor could help us to actually become more efficient in skill acquisition.
Yeah.
That would give us more time to now do some of the other things that are equally, if not more important than the skills. So I think that there's a place for these assistive technologies if they're used in an appropriate way, and that they don't take up all of our time.
Yeah.
They actually free us to do something different.
Yes.
And I think we talk about AI having this great efficiency, right? The great question about AI is one, how can you do things so that you can save time, right?
Yes.
But the next question, which is more important, what are you going to do with that time?
Yes. So
Right?
important.
How are you going to reprioritize your day?
Yeah.
How are you going to reallocate that time? If teachers, for example, are not spending 2-3 hours a day grading papers,
No.
what are they going to do? There's plenty that they can do
Yes.
in terms of making the learning environment and their curriculum more effective,
Yes.
more varied, more multimodal, more individualized to every child. There's so many things that we could do if we weren't just grading papers all day.
Yeah.
And so that reallocation of time can be a wonderful thing.
I know at AES also we have many children who have learning difficulties. What does the school do differently for these children?
You find the interventions for someone that has a learning difference to be really good for every kid for the most part, right?
True.
And I think it has a lot to do with finding specialists, people that really understand how a child's brain works,
Yeah.
and develop interventions that are effective for those children, and then training our teachers
Yes.
to be able to recognize that their methods can have a huge impact on how the kid learns in the class.
True.
Right. I think that it can be done in such a way that it makes everyone better in the classroom. It can also be done in such a way that it makes the class terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Where you end up teaching to the lowest common denominator. The kid that's struggling the most gets all the attention. And then the kids that are high performing get sort of ignored. Right? And we can't let that happen. Right?
No.
But there has to be a recognition that every child's brain is a little bit different.
Yes.
And we're going to develop every possible strategy to make sure that every child can learn at the highest level possible.
Yeah.
But that diversity in the classroom is something that requires a professional educator, a high level teacher to manage.
Yeah.
And if the teacher's not performing at that level, it can be a real challenge, right? So you can't do it in every classroom, is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
There are classrooms around the world where you might have a teacher who's new, right? And a standard curriculum may be the best thing that teacher does.
Yes.
Because if they try to do something a little more innovative, they may fail,
Yeah.
right? And so they have to learn, they have to have a pretty high skill set to be able to recognize how to address all the needs in the classroom and have that toolbox that you develop as an experienced teacher of all these different ways of helping kids to learn something and assess what they learn, all right, and move through the curriculum. So it's not an easy answer to that question, right? It's complicated. Learning's complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I do think that when we talk about learning differences, we all have learning differences.
Yes.
Every one of us, we all
yes.
learn in a different way.
Yeah, as you said, we are good at something and might be struggling at something
Yeah.
else, you know.
Yeah.
And it's
Some
really-
kids are more compliant than others. So.
Yeah. I remember, I think I was a very good student, and what was the term you used? The perfectionists
Yeah, perfectionist.
who didn't explore.
Yeah.
I was one of those.
Sure.
And I'm much later in life I realized this. And then I was constantly, even today I constantly tell myself that rather than I don't want to be the first, I don't want to be the perfect, I would want to dig deeper and not have the superficial knowledge, rather have a deeper knowledge. And that is what I'm working on these days.
Well, you're an entrepreneur, so you understand risk taking.
I think that taught me a lot.
Yeah. You know, I tell kids that, you know, and I don't think parents want me to say this out loud, but doing really well in school doesn't mean you're going to do really well in life, right?
Absolutely.
And so you have to learn at some point that, you know, I think growing up through school, you are the audience,
Yeah.
and the performers are your parents and the school telling you, like, you're the audience of all these people that are performing for you. And then at some point in life, it switches and the
yes.
world becomes your audience.
Yes.
And it's what you can share to the world. It's managing your brand. Like, who are you, right? And this is going back to that idea that every one of us starts at some point to see ourselves as our own startup,
Yeah.
right? We have to invest in ourselves, and
Yes.
we're going to have an impact on the world and create value in the world in some way.
Absolutely.
And so the world becomes our audience. And that switch is really important to think about.
True. And I think now, thankfully, children have that exposure
Yes.
from a very young age,
Yes.
because the education is changing completely and schools are adapting to that. So it is very much important. But if I were to ask you, because we as parents, we constantly want to push our kids, motivate them. We want them to, learn a certain way, perform a certain way. But you see different kids, their perspectives, their learning abilities and everything. I mean, I'm not sure if it is the right thing to say, but a perfect student, if there was a term as perfect student, what are the 3 traits or qualities that you think that perfect student must have?
Well, that's a difficult question. I don't know if there's just 3.
Yeah.
We've talked about curiosity, right?
Yes.
And when you talk about, pushing a child, there are different kinds of motivation. And the perfect child has intrinsic motivation, not extrinsic, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that intrinsic desire, we talked about motivation and engagement,
Yes.
right? That child has that in some way, and they're doing things because they're curious and they're interested and they're asking questions and they're engaged, right?
Yeah.
Those are something that every teacher is like, oh, I want to teach that kid, right?
Yeah.
And they have that piece. I guess I hesitate to even answer the question because I don't think there is there are no perfect children.
No.
And, when I think back, when you ask the question, I think back on many of the students that I've had in life, and the ones that I have valued the most, that I had the most worthwhile experience with, were not the perfect ones.
No.
They weren't the easy ones,
Yeah.
right? They were the ones that struggled. And that's where our craft of teaching has the greatest impact, right?
True.
And you're able to unlock something for that child where they saw something, they learned something, they found that thing that allowed them to become an explorer when they were
Yes.
a passenger.
Yes.
And so it's those transformations that teachers live for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not a set trait. It's the ability to think differently,
Yeah.
right? To come into your class thinking one thing and then they leave thinking something else and you think, I've done something.
Yeah.
We've made the world a better place.
Yeah. Since we are talking about that, that's going to be my next question.
Yeah.
I think if we look at the history of learning and education, last 100 years, 200 years, so much we have learned from experiences, by doing things, and on the basis of the needs of the society. You know, all the innovation which came through. We invented electricity and so many more things. So another thing which I feel our children are facing and might face in the future as well is the conflict which world is going through, or even the bigger problems like climatic issues or water crisis. There's so many countries who are under conflict today, and we have students from those countries studying at our school under the same roof. How do you think we can prepare our children for this, and how do you think the schools can contribute better? So according to you, what do you think should be the core purpose of the schools?
Because I actually think life is much easier now than it used to be.
Yes,
I mean, I think life was much more difficult.
true.
Much more difficult for our parents and our grandparents. And life has
Yeah.
become actually easier. You wouldn't know it, but there's much less poverty in the world today.
Yeah.
Right. There's much more literacy in the world today. There are more women going to school today than ever in the history of the planet.
True.
Right.
True.
So we can catastrophize because of the headlines, but if you look at the statistics of our world, humanity's doing pretty darn well in many ways.
Yeah.
There are some conflicts that are amplified that scare us.
Yes.
Right? We all are scared by the immensity of the problems and how they've been amplified.
Yeah.
But I'll remind all of us that there's always been problems in society. And some of these were pretty big problems, right?
Yeah.
We've been through, 3 world wars and there's been genocides, right? These aren't, war is not something new to our
Yeah.
planet. This kind of conflict is not something new. And so our ability to navigate these things, I think are important. I'm not sure it's new.
Yeah.
I think we have different tools now
Yes.
to do that. I will bring it back to international schools because we have, like I said, 70 different countries represented in our school.
Yes.
So we have Palestinians and we have Israelis
Yeah.
and we have Russians and we have Ukrainians,
Yeah.
right? And so you have people at our school sitting side by side in a classroom learning whose countries are in conflict,
Yeah.
deep conflict,
Yes.
horrible conflict. And this has an impact on the kids and their families. It has a huge impact on our faculty. Many of our faculty are international teachers, so they come from these places.
Yes.
And they know they have friends in harm's way and that they have friends who are suffering.
Yeah.
And so how do you bring your full energetic self into a classroom
Yeah.
when you just spent the night on the phone with a friend who is huddling in their basement because there are bombs dropping all around their home?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
How do we live our lives knowing the immense suffering that is happening in the world? And I answer that for myself, which is that world peace starts in our own hearts, right? It starts in how we treat each other, how we are with our friends and our family and the people we work with. And so we ask our staff to come to work,
Yeah.
even though they may have been up all night
Yeah.
talking to friends that were, sitting in a bomb shelter somewhere, to come to work and understand that the work they're doing lies at the center of peacemaking.
True.
It's the most important thing that happens in the world.
Yeah.
How can we expect the world to solve their geopolitical conflicts if we can't teach kids how to solve conflict on the playground, right? In the classroom. So, and how do we as adults model that? How do we navigate conflict?
Yeah.
And there's so much work to be done, right? With ourselves, that that's a pretty good place to start. Right? And it takes us from a feeling of maybe helplessness to a feeling of empowerment.
Yeah.
We can do this.
No, absolutely. I think it starts, as you said, starts from within you and also starts from a very young age. So it starts from within you and it starts from home and your community and your educational centers, everything collectively, because that is where we are building the future of the children, their mindset, their thinking, their perspective, and we all are collectively contributing to this. And you very beautifully said it, that that is where we need to start teaching peace and building that perspective.
It touches on another topic on some level, which is the purpose of teaching, the purpose of schools.
Yeah.
And every school has a different narrative. There are schools with different purposes. You know, some are strictly skill building, right? And some are designed specifically to empower an individual to be able to get a job, right? Develop something to be able to then support their families. And those are good narratives. But as you ask this question of what should schools be doing against the backdrop of all this conflict and really large scale problems in the world, is changing the narrative of schools, where it's not just about me.
Yeah.
It's about service.
Yeah.
How do I serve others, right? How can I have a responsibility of figuring out how I can add value to the world in such a way that makes the world a better place.
Yeah.
And that's a different purpose for learning,
True.
right? That's has a service aspect of it that certainly our school embraces. And I think it's an important narrative.
Absolutely.
That we have to do. And schools are the great multiplier. Right. If you're an investor, right, you're always looking for multiplying effects. I give $1 here, it becomes 10, it becomes $1 million, right? Well, the great multiplier is schools, right? So you have one teacher who impacts a single child in a way that inspires them to be an explorer and to maybe go serve the world in a different way.
True.
And then they go out into the world and they impact 10 people.
Yeah.
And those 10 people each start maybe a nonprofit organization or their own school, or they do something spectacular. And each of them are impacting maybe thousands of kids. And each of those thousands of kids impact another 10,000 kids or 1 million kids.
Yeah.
So the multiplier effect of education is the greatest of any system in the world. It's the greatest investment that a parent can make.
With the best ROI.
It's the greatest investment that society can make, is that we invest in our children.
True.
Because they will change the world.
Absolutely.
I have this great job, and when things are going a little crazy in the world, I get out of my office and I walk around classrooms and I sit with kids and listen to them. Yeah. And there are so many brilliant kids that have these brilliant ideas. It gives me hope every day. Yeah. We have a program at our school, Alternative Pathways, we call IDI, which is the Innovation Design Institute. And they're doing these exact projects, taking on big ideas, right? Yeah. How can we do something to make the world a better place? How can we solve the issue of hunger? Yeah. How can we solve the issue of clean water? Yeah. How can we solve the issue of healthcare and accessibility to healthcare, right? All these really big questions. Yeah. And these kids have come up with these incredible ideas, right? Yeah. They're undaunted by the immensity of it. Yeah. Right. And we need those kids, right? They're going to go out in the world and they're going to figure it out. I have a lot of hope, a lot of faith in these kids and their abilities to change the world. So, will the world ever be a perfect place? No, there will always be challenges. There will always be conflict. There will always be problems to be solved. This goes back to, the Buddhist fable, right? The 87th problem, I think it's called, where Buddhist, the farmer's complaining about he's got 87 problems and he's trying to get rid of them. And I think Buddha says, well, if you were to solve one of those problems, so you have 86, tomorrow you will have 87.
Yeah.
We will always have a certain number of problems,
True,
right? And it's
true.
just how we manage that, and do it a little bit with a simple, light, joyous approach,
True. And
Can help
living
us.
in present.
living in the present.
Yeah, that is so important. And as they say, life can never be smooth. There'll always be something new
Yes.
which will trouble you. Some new problems, some new issues and hiccups.
Always.
Yeah,
Always.
it
always,
never
always.
goes in a straight line. So
Yeah.
you have to be prepared and, as
Yeah.
you said, be joyful while solving this.
That's right.
Try to be at least.
Right.
The other thing I'm really curious to know is that, we have children going to the international schools. They're exposed to so many nationalities and cultures, learning so much on day-to-day basis. But there are kids who are going to traditional schools and they do not have this exposure of the international community. But still, their parents would want to prepare them for the outside world.
Sure.
When they grow up, move countries, go to the universities. How do you think parents can actually prepare their kids to be the global citizens in future?
If you look at all of history,
Yes.
there's never been a time in history where it's better to be a learner.
Yeah.
You have access. Every kid has access to everything,
Yeah.
right? And so for parents, a little bit about curation, how we curate that knowledge, right? That because there's so much out there, but the ability to access resources
Yes.
that gives you a window into a culture you have a curiosity about,
Yeah.
that can even give you an experience that you want to have with a different culture. If you want to learn something, there is nothing that prevents you from learning something
So true.
right now
Yeah.
at a level that you can have an 8th grader pursue something at the level of a PhD student tomorrow if that's what they want to do, right?
Yeah.
So access to learning is really unlimited, and so it's our jobs, right?
Yeah.
Again, to find those things that the kid has an interest in, and then feeding them sort of access to resources that allow them to pursue those things
Yeah.
that they have an interest in. So, I think growing up in a home without resources, in a school without resources, also teaches you something different. And we talk about how we have to teach parents how to teach their kids to be resilient. These
Yeah.
kids are resilient out of the get-go,
True.
right?
Yeah.
So again, if you go read the stories of our heroes, the stories that whether they're have started businesses or become successful, we find many examples of successful people that began their life in very modest households,
Yeah.
at very modest schools without resources, and they learned
True.
to be the explorer,
Yeah.
right? They learned how to ask questions,
Yeah.
and then now have access to answering those questions that they have. Where
Yeah.
before they may not have ever asked the question because they didn't have access to a context with which they could answer the question or even understand what questions to ask.
Yeah.
So the key to so much is not the answers, it's asking the right question.
Yeah.
Right? How do we teach our kids to ask the right question? Why are we doing this? How can I learn more about that thing?
Yeah.
Why do people behave the way they do?
Yeah.
Why does this country do this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important also to teach the word and versus or. And let me explain what I mean by that. We're living in a polarized world where people use the word or too much, right? You're either with me or against me.
Yeah.
You either believe this and you're my friend, or you don't believe this and you're my enemy.
Yeah.
And there's something in the nature of the world that I think supports the idea of polarity.
Yeah.
It's not this or that. It's this and that.
Yeah.
one of the great lessons, and actually this comes from physics, believe it or not.
Yeah.
You have to go to quantum physics to get it, but it's this understanding that two people can be opposed to each other, disagree, and they can both be right.
Okay.
That's a lesson I had to learn.
Yeah.
And so right now when people disagree, they assume I'm right and you're wrong.
All the time. Yeah.
But there's a polarity where you could say, you know, you're both disagree
Yeah.
and you're both right.
Yeah.
And we have to find that ability in ourselves to see a different person's perspective.
Yes.
We see things from our own perspective, and the perspective we see is true, but our perspective is not the same as everyone's perspective.
True. So important to understand this, especially for parents, you know.
Yeah.
Because there's so many notions we have or ideas we have which we think this is the way to go forward.
Right.
And that can be very challenging for children.
Yeah.
So I have experienced this myself. Like my daughter, she came to me and she said like, oh, I don't like maths. And I was like, how's that possible? Because I loved maths. And your grandfather was a mathematics teacher. How can you not like maths?
Yes.
But on the other hand, you know, there's just one thing I always felt that I'm lacking is the creativity.
Yeah.
And she's very creative. So I'm happy. I was like, okay, you can trade in. You cannot be good at maths, but you're very good at creative stuff. So, Dr. Harrington, we have spoken about the core purpose of schooling. But what, according to you, is the core purpose of parenting?
You asked me about the purpose of schools.
Yes.
And I think it's also an important question to ask the purpose of parenting.
Absolutely.
Right? Why do we parent? What are our hopes for our kids? And there's a woman, her name is Julie Lythcott Hames, and she was a dean at Stanford, the freshman dean.
Okay.
Seeing all these kids come in that were very smart and very fragile, right? And so she wrote a book about this called How to Raise an Adult, which is interesting. And she said that one of the challenges with the sort of extreme parenting she was seeing was that parents were treating their kids as if it was sort of some kind of a game show in which the prize was college. Right? And that's what they were aiming for. So they're going to get a scholarship, they're going to get good grades, and then they're going to get into the best possible college.
Yes.
And once they get into the best possible college, right, then their life will be great moving forward. And what she reminds parents is that we shouldn't be raising our kids to think that that's the end game. We should be focused on that healthy 35-year-old.
You have worked with students from the elementary school, middle school, high school, and children go through a lot of phases. And for parents also, it's very hard to understand, you know, how to tackle these different phases during their childhood. Which phase, according to you, is the hardest to deal with and where parents have to be extra supportive?
Well, I think the hardest transitions tend to be from middle to high school, to be honest.
Okay.
There's a 8th grade is a difficult grade for kids. Can be the adolescents, right? Their bodies are changing rapidly,
True.
Which makes it hard for their brains to think straight on some level.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting statistics or correlation, right? Where if you want to know whether a girl will someday become a scientist, like pursue scientific or STEM field, look at their interest in science and math in 8th grade. It correlates the strongest of any factor, which I thought was fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens in 7th grade, usually we see, sometimes 6th grade, but usually 7th, and certainly in 8th grade, is that kids start to believe that being smart is not cool.
Okay.
And they start not aspiring for academics or trying to learn.
Yeah.
They're trying to get friendships, right? Friendships are huge. They want approval,
popular,
right? They want to be
kid.
popular. They want some kind of an approval,
Yeah.
and they're also starting to navigate risk taking. Adolescents have to develop by risk taking, and if they don't have an opportunity for healthy risk taking, they'll find another way.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's where we see the start of sexual activity, or we see the drinking alcohol
Yes.
or drugs. It's a form of risk taking, which is hardwired into an adolescent to do those risks.
Yeah.
And so if we want to keep our kids safe,
Yes.
but then we, by doing that, remove all sort of risky things, they'll find a bad way to take risks that could be damaging to them. So
True.
That's why you don't want to intervene too much. You want them to take the risk of trying out for that team. Maybe they're not suited for,
Yeah.
and they may not get on that team.
Yeah.
They may find risk taking in the theater, theater arts, where they try out for the school play. You're putting yourself out on the line. That's risky behavior.
Yeah.
That's risk taking,
Yeah.
right? Trying new things they've never tried before is a
True.
form of risk taking. So I think we have to allow our kids that form of risk taking. Those kids also are, at the same time that's happening,
Yeah.
they're starting to develop their independence. That's
True.
the hardest thing for parents,
True.
right? Is that I always tell parents, about that time, 9th grade, 8th grade, you're going to get fired.
Yeah.
You're going to get fired from being a parent. And if you're
Yeah.
lucky, they'll hire you back as a consultant, right?
Yeah.
And so you do have to move into more of a consulting role
Yeah.
for them,
Yeah.
because they are owning their behaviors, and they need to learn how to own their behaviors.
True.
But they're pushing away because in 4 short years, they're leaving home.
Yeah.
And so again, it comes back to many things we talked about this morning
Yeah.
about letting kids learn problem solving, to learn to own failure,
Yeah.
to try things,
Yeah.
and do that while they have a loving parent around to support them,
True.
but not a loving parent to take those things away from them, to
Yeah.
rob them of those experiences,
True.
right? And sometimes parents have the feeling, oh, this is the only time I'll ever be able to direct their lives, so I'm going to make them perfect before I send them out. And it has the opposite effect. You asked for another piece of advice about parenting kids so they become more resilient. One thing they say, across all the researchers say, make sure your kids do chores
At home. Yeah.
at home. Give them jobs to do.
True.
They have to have responsibilities. And
Yeah.
that's an important thing that they need to learn.
True.
Yeah.
So much needed. And as you rightly said, we have to equip them with right knowledge and awareness. And another such important topic, which I think not many schools are focused on, is the health education. And especially in the adolescence phase, where they start to get into the puberty and the reproductive health, all these topics need to be covered. And very importantly, children need to be taught about even the sex education, knowing their bodies, how can they be safe. But very few schools are including this education. How important do you think it is?
This is a difficult question.
Yeah.
Because we also talked about cultures.
Yes.
And every culture treats these topics differently.
Yeah.
And some of these topics in some cultures are taboo, right?
Yes.
They don't want schools
Yeah.
teaching their kids about these things. And so one has to find a curriculum that's meaningful, right? That gives kids the kind of education that they need to have. We talk about, sex education. There's the biology of it.
Yes.
And that usually comes up in our biology classes, right? We have, and middle school, they'll have sex ed classes of sorts.
Yeah.
The thing that we don't do well is relationship classes,
Yes.
which is more important even,
True.
right? How do you navigate a breakup? How do you ask a girl? How does a boy ask a girl? How do you have a meaningful relationship? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? What is the give and take and the complexity of that? And so relationship building should be part of those health curriculums, I think.
True.
There are, certainly living here in Delhi in India, there's all sorts of health hazards,
Yeah.
right? And so, cleanliness, washing your hands, all the safety, all the COVID protocols we learned,
Yes,
right?
yes.
About not passing diseases on and being safe have to be part of our, and it's not controversial. It's something
Yeah.
we can do all the time. That's really important. We are finding, certainly in the United States, and it's a little different in each culture, but we're finding that girls are menstruating at a much younger level.
Yes.
And so that education has to get pushed down into, it used to be 8th, 7th, 8th grade.
Yes.
Now it's 4th or 5th grade,
True.
right? And so our bodies are changing,
True.
right? And we have, again, with the internet and cell phones,
Yeah.
kids have access to pornography. They have access
Yes.
to everything.
Yes.
Right. So it used to be that your reading level determined the level of sophistication you would be introduced to new ideas. As your reading got better,
Yeah.
you could read about more complex things. And so now, unprepared,
Yeah.
any kid can have access to any really complicated and sometimes damaging ideas or images on the
Yeah.
internet.
Yeah.
And so whose responsibility is it to protect kids from those things? Protecting kids from those things
True.
are very important things that parents can do
True.
and should be doing.
True. And it's also about one thing is having access to information, and the other one is having access to right information.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that is also very
But
important.
who's going to police it?
ensure.
Who's going
Yeah.
to say what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah.
Right. This is a
Yes.
challenge.
I also run a foundation. And under that foundation, I started the foundation with the thought of educating women about their maternal health, and used to run programs across the slums, the villages, the rural areas. And very soon we realized that most of the issues, the health issues these women are facing during pregnancy are coming because of poor health practices they started during their adolescence phase. So, because that is where your body starts to change, your
Yeah.
nutrition levels, your hormone levels, everything changes. And that is the right time that you start educating yourself about your own health and your body and your mind. And that is where the girls need to kind of start prepping themselves for a phase to
Yeah.
come much later. And so we started doing these programs across the government schools in India, where we educated girls about, menstruation, reproductive health, because there were a lot of issues of teen pregnancies and unsafe abortions, which led to much bigger problems later in life. So these programs we conducted with the gynecologists and pediatricians at school, educated them. So that they can adopt healthy practices and habits and have right education and awareness to lead a life where they have more autonomy.
That's
That was the
wonderful
core
that you're doing
purpose.
that work. It's fantastic. Yeah.
And I feel that till some extent, every school should have this sort of curriculum to educate children, maybe more in a technical way, as you said, and
Sure.
rest of the job needs to be done from the parents' side.
Yes.
When it comes to the emotional aspect of it,
Yeah.
but very much needed, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah. And, my wife and I have a number of boys.
Yes.
Right. And the education for boys is critical.
True.
We're seeing, that boys are becoming less and less successful, less getting into college. Their grades have declined.
Okay.
They become more disenfranchised with
Yeah.
things. And so when we talk about education, about respecting women, right? About violence, right? Domestic violence, and where does that start, right? A young man's or a boy's understanding of what it means to be a man. What does it mean to grow up to be a man, and what that represents? That kind of education, right? If you learn it from the internet, we're finding that boys are becoming more disenfranchised, less able to have relationships, stable relationships, less able to have friendships that are productive and mutually respectful.
Yeah.
And so I applaud you. That has to happen with women. And I'm like, yes, and not or, and we really need to be educating our young men
True.
on how to be in the world
Yeah.
in a way that's positive.
True.
in a way they can bring value and support and feel good about themselves.
I'm so happy you mentioned that.
Yeah.
You know, it's so much needed because most of the focus is always on the girls or women,
Right?
especially when it comes to health
Yeah.
education or even relationships.
Yeah.
But boys have to be equally educated, equally involved. And as we also had a program called gender sensitization. So when it comes to women's health, the involvement of men is equally important because they are building this family together.
That's right.
So he needs to understand what his wife or partner is going through, you know, when it comes to her physical well-being or mental well-being or
Yes.
emotional well-being, to be able to support her better and eventually have a healthy and happier family. The core focus which parents usually have after school is getting into right colleges. And often we are very confused, like what is the right time to start prepping, like preparing for the right college admissions? And what are the things that we can start doing from maybe middle school to prepare our children to get into right college?
This is a big topic, and as you know, I have a lot of opinions about this. We could do a whole segment about college admissions. The college admission system is certainly broken in the United States, right? But the key here, when you say you want your child to get into the best college, is how are you defining best? Like, what does that mean? And it should be a good match for your child.
Okay.
Based on that child's interests and how they learn, right? And what their aspirations are, what they want to do. There is a belief among parents that best means, the most elite colleges. And the most elite colleges are often not the best match for a child. And we've seen that a lot, right? Where kids get into a Princeton or a Harvard and they're exhausted and they can't compete. MIT had to eliminate grading for their freshman class because of the high suicide rate.
Yeah.
So if I had a friend who was her father was a Nobel Prize winner in physics.
Wow.
And he came to my class to talk to my physics class. He's walking around my physics class and asking, because it was at the end of the year and they were seniors, where are you going to school? And Princeton, Harvard, they wanted to go all these places. He's like, oh my gosh, if I had gone to any of those schools, I wouldn't have ever been successful. He said he went to a small school, which allowed him to do research with the professor as an undergraduate.
Okay.
He got to sort of shine like a big fish in a little pond.
Yeah.
Develop his confidence about his abilities, right, to learn at his pace. And then he was able to show his success there and then go to, I think he went to University of Chicago in graduate school, right?
Yeah.
Because he found that path, right? And became very successful. But that first step to the first college has to be a good match if you really want your child to thrive. Yeah. The bottom line is there are plenty of great schools. And there's a school for your child, right? Is it going to be Harvard or Stanford? Not necessarily. But Harvard or Stanford may not be the best match for your child either.
True.
Right? The best thing you can do to prepare your child, right, is for them to learn who they are. Figure out what they're capable of, the things that they actually love to do.
Yeah.
Right? That's the story they'll tell for their college admissions. When you talk to college admissions officers. So I had a meeting with the head of admissions at Stanford. I know the guy, we used to meet with him at Stanford. And we'd say to him, all right, so tell us, what are you looking for?
Yeah.
Like, what are you really looking for, right? And he would say, what we're really looking for are kids that can sit around a room with people who don't look or think like them.
Okay.
And have a good conversation and work through problems.
Yeah.
Right? How does a kid learn how to be a member of a community? Because this is their first entry into a new community, right?
Yeah.
Colleges have all kinds of problems with kids that don't know how to be a member of a community.
Yeah.
Right? They're causing real issues. So college presidents are looking at changing. They look at a different lens. They want to know, will this child add value to my school?
Yes.
Right? And are they a good citizen? Right? Are they a community member? Do they care about things? So it's not just about GPA and grades.
The academics.
It's not just about that. The grades can be gamed. As you know, the essays can now be gamed. But I do counsel kids to say, look, if you really want to go somewhere at a particular college, show consistent interest in them.
True.
Write to them, go visit,
Yeah.
keep bothering them.
Yeah.
Say, I like your school. I want to know more about this, and show an interest, because you'll stand out then from all the other applications. They don't know if they really care, if they really want to go there. But there are plenty of great schools.
True.
I would tell parents, relax. It's going to be fine, right? Yeah. And there are plenty of opportunities for kids.
So, Dr. Harrington, thank you so much for being so graceful, so thoughtful, and so insightful on this show today. I'm going to move on to our next segment before we wrap this up. It's called Community Q&A, where we receive a question from one of our community members for the guest we have on the show. So today's question is from Neha, and she's asking, in today's world of constant comparison, whether it's academic pressure or social media, how can parents help their children build a strong sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation?
Turn off the phone. It is a world of comparison.
Yeah.
It's very challenging for kids when they're seeing all of what society is telling them they should be, what they should look like, what they should say, how they should be, and then they compare themselves to that, right? And so I think, I'm honest, turn off the phone, get away from the phone. Is probably the most important thing we can do. Yeah. And get them exposure to what's normal, right? Which is their family and friends, and having real play dates with real friends over, navigating, like I said, conflict and working on solving problems together and doing that work face to face. So that socialization piece, without the internet, is really important.
Moving on to our next segment, we call it the fun segment, and that's going to be our last segment on the show. Today, we are moving into a fun little challenge we call One Line, One Lesson.
Now you're making me nervous, Bianca.
I'm not going to make you sing, so that's okay. I'll say a parenting or education theme, and your task is to respond with just one sentence of advice. It could be practical, poetic, or philosophical, just one line. Ready?
Okay, here we go.
So, number one is curiosity.
Piece of advice for parents. Let your kids explore.
Amazing. Number two, failure.
Let your kids fail.
Yeah, and learn from it. So much needed. The first day of school.
First day of school, know that your children will be very nervous and will act like they can't not ever leave you. But as soon as you leave and go get in the car, they are joyous little bundles. They do very well when you're not there. Yeah.
Play versus academics.
Play versus academics. I go with play every time. Academics has a role for sure, and there has to be a balance, but play is where you learn maybe the most important lessons, particularly when you're young.
So true. Kindness.
Something we should all practice.
Childhood.
Enjoy it. It goes fast. It goes fast.
And the last one is success.
Success. It should be measured by how we're able to get up every morning with a smile on our face or not. It's that successful 35-year-old you're hoping for your children. That's a success. Yeah. And they can navigate the world well without you there all the time. Yeah. That's a measure of success.
But thank you so much. And you won this round. So I have this hamper for you from Mate.
Oh, my goodness.
It's for kids, but you can use them too. So
thank you very much, Priyanka. I so enjoyed our conversation.
Here. I thoroughly enjoyed. I learned so much and so many things I could totally resonate with, relate with, and totally agree with. So
we will see you around campus.
For sure, all the time. Thank you.
Dhanyavad.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you.